How did Ptolemaic priests calculate astronomical shifts that wouldn't be discovered for another 1,000 years? Right now, inside the Louvre Museum in Paris, there is a piece of carved stone that has been unsettling the world's best astronomers, mathematicians, and historians for over 200 years. It was cut from the ceiling of an Egyptian temple in 1821, sawed out, shipped across the Mediterranean, sold to a French king, and what is encoded inside its layout, the geometry, the star positions, the precise mathematical relationships, suggests that the men who carved it knew something they were never supposed to know. This is the story of the Dendera Temple, and the cold, hard mathematics hiding in its stone. Close your eyes for a moment. You are standing in Upper Egypt, roughly 50 years before the birth of Christ. The Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek-Egyptian rulers descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, is beginning to crack. Rome is circling, power is shifting. But here in the temple city the ancients called Unet, something extraordinary is being finished. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera. You look up, and what you see stops you cold. The ceiling of the inner chapel is alive with figures, a circular map, roughly 2.5 meters across, carved directly into the stone above your head. 36 divine figures hold up the rim. Inside them, constellations, planets, the 12 signs of the zodiac, a walking woman, a scorpion, a lion, the scales of justice. You are looking at one of the oldest complete zodiacs ever discovered. But here is the thing nobody warned you about. This is not decoration. When the first European astronomers sat down and actually ran the mathematics, when they mapped those carved positions against real sky data, they found something encoded in the stone that had no business being there. Numbers that only a civilization with extraordinary computational intelligence could have known. Let me give you some context, because this part changes everything. In the 2nd century before Christ, around 127 BCE, a Greek astronomer named Hipparchus of Nicaea made what history remembers as one of the greatest intellectual discoveries of the ancient world. He discovered precession. Now, if you're not familiar with precession, here's the simplest way to understand it. The Earth doesn't just spin, it wobbles, slowly, like a spinning top losing momentum. And as it wobbles, the direction of its axis traces a massive invisible circle in the sky. One complete wobble takes approximately 26,000 years. What this means practically is that the North Star changes over time. The stars that rise on the horizon at the spring equinox gradually drift. The whole picture of the night sky slowly rotates, 1 degree roughly every 72 years. Hipparchus compared ancient star charts. He measured the shift, and history handed him credit for one of the greatest achievements in the story of astronomy. But here is what most people miss. The astronomical ceiling of the outer hypostyle hall at Dendera is older than the Zodiac Chapel. The temple construction began even earlier under Ptolemy XII, and the astronomical data encoded throughout the complex, the star alignments, the decan star clocks, the precise orientation of the building itself, suggests something that rewrites the accepted timeline. That the priests at Dendera didn't just know about precession after Hipparchus, they had been calculating it for generations before him. Pay attention to this, because this is the first piece of hard evidence. The Dendera Temple is not randomly positioned on the landscape. Archaeologists have confirmed that its primary axis, the straight line running from the main entrance through to the innermost sanctuary, aligns precisely with the summer solstice sunset. This is not an accident. No ancient Egyptian structure was placed by accident. From the pyramids of Giza to the great temple at Luxor, these builders encoded astronomical precision into their foundations. They used the sky as their blueprint. But the orientation is only the beginning. Here is where the mathematics becomes genuinely extraordinary. The star clock ceilings, called decans by Egyptologists, divide the night sky into 36 segments, each rising 10 days apart. They functioned as a combined calendar and clock. The Egyptians had refined them across 2,000 years before Dendera's inner chapel was ever carved. But the Dendera complex does something the older decan systems never attempted. It overlays the decan system with the full zodiac. It maps the positions of the 5 visible planets. It encodes the location of the sun and moon at one specific moment in time. When the French astronomer Jean-Baptiste Biot ran the calculations in 1822, he determined that the planetary positions in the zodiac matched a real date. a real configuration of the sky above Egypt. Other astronomers computed slightly different dates. The debate ran for decades, but every single one of them agreed on one thing. Whoever carved this ceiling was working from real astronomical data. Precise, recorded, tracked observations, not mythology, not sacred symbolism, not artistic choice, stone-cold mathematics. And here's what nobody tells you. The precession-shifted positions of several constellations visible in the zodiac suggest that the original observational data feeding into this carving may stretch back far further than 50 BCE. Some researchers, examining the drift of specific star groups against the carved positions, conclude the base calculations could be centuries older, preserved, updated, and recarved by successive generations of priests. In other words, the ceiling you can visit in Paris today may be the final copy of a document that began being written 1,000 years earlier. But the zodiac ceiling is only the most famous piece of what Dendera contains. Hidden beneath the main temple are a series of crypts, small sealed rooms carved into the stone foundations of the building. They are not prominently advertised. They are not on the standard tour route. Inside these crypts are walls dense with hieroglyphic inscriptions and relief figures. And some of these inscriptions contain what appear to be precise angular measurements, sky coordinates. Numbers that, when decoded by modern researchers, correspond to the positions of star groups at intervals consistent with a tracked precession cycle. Now, to be absolutely clear, Egyptologists still debate the precise interpretation of the crypt texts. The numbers are real, the inscriptions are real, the correspondence with precession intervals is real. What is debated is whether the priests were doing intentional computational astronomy, or whether centuries of meticulous sky watching produced the same result by a different path. Stay with me, because here is where it gets strange. When Champollion, the man who cracked the Rosetta Stone and could read ancient Egyptian better than almost any living person, first studied the Dendera Zodiac, he was disappointed. He had hoped the stellar positions would prove the carving was 10,000 years old, evidence of a forgotten civilization. Instead, his translations confirmed it was Ptolemaic, 1st century BCE ordinary. But in trying to prove it was ordinary, he may have walked right past what makes it extraordinary. Not its age, its accuracy. In 1821, a French engineer named Sébastien Louis Saulnier arrived at Dendera with a team of workers, hydraulic jacks and saws. They cut the zodiac out of the temple ceiling. A raw hole was left open in the sacred roof, exposed to Egyptian sun, rain, birds, and sand. The zodiac was shipped to France, presented to King Louis XVIII, purchased for 150,000 francs. The plaster replica installed in its place is a faithful copy. But copies don't carry the tool marks left by ancient craftsmen. They don't carry the micro variations in carving depth that serious researchers use to extract additional data. They don't carry the original mineral staining that helps date the work. When they took something that cannot be fully replaced, and this was not an isolated act. Across the colonial period, the dismantling of Egypt's astronomical heritage was systematic. Papyri were burned, traded, scattered. Astronomical texts were separated from the temples they were designed to be read alongside. The accumulated knowledge of the priests of Dendera, built across centuries, encoded in stone, ceiling, and inscription, was fragmented across the museums of Europe. What we have recovered is remarkable. What was lost may have been more remarkable still. Here is what I think the Dendera Temple actually proves. It is not proof that the ancient Egyptians had telescopes, or computers, or visitors from another world. It is proof of something far more powerful. It is proof that a culture committed to watching, recording, and calculating, generation after generation, century after century, priest to student to priest, can accumulate a form of computational intelligence that rivals the greatest minds of any era. The priests of Dendera did not discover precession in one brilliant moment of genius. They built the discovery, slowly, by refusing to forget what the man before them had observed. That is the lesson encoded in this stone. Patience is a form of intelligence. Accumulation is a form of genius. And some of the most sophisticated scientific thinking in human history was carved into a temple ceiling in a river valley in Africa, long before anyone in the Western world had a name for what it was. The Dendera Zodiac sits behind glass in Paris today. If it was returned to the ceiling where it belongs, if the stars it was built to track could once again be seen through the opening above it, what do you think it would still be capable of telling us? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one.